The fork paused halfway to my mouth, a piece of pan-seared salmon trembling just inches from my lips. Outside, the city hummed its usual nightly tune, but inside our little booth, the world had ground to a halt. Sarah had just dropped her bomb, casually, between a sip of Chardonnay and a comment about the restaurant's new decor. "Oh, by the way," she'd started, the 4 most dangerous words in a marriage. "My friend Jake is in a bit of a jam. His new lease fell through, and he needs a place to crash for just a few weeks. I told him he could use the guest room. He's moving his stuff in tonight." The salmon slid from my fork, landing with a soft, final thud on the pristine white plate. My anniversary dinner. Our 10th. A metallic tang, sharp and coppery like an old penny, flooded my mouth. It was the taste of betrayal, and it completely overwhelmed the expensive meal I could no longer eat. I watched her, really watched her, as she fussed with her napkin, refusing to meet my gaze. Her fingers, long and delicate, toyed with the stem of her wineglass, and the candlelight glinted off the diamond wedding ring I'd slipped onto her hand a decade ago. It felt like a prop in a poorly staged play, a cheap mockery of the vows we'd taken. She wasn't looking at me because she knew what she was doing. She knew what this meant. It was all there in the slight tremor of her hand, the determined set of her jaw, my chest constricted, a painful tightening that was equal parts white-hot rage and bone-deep humiliation. She wasn't asking for my permission. She was informing me of a decision already made. Jake, her friend from the gym, the one whose name had started popping up in her stories with increasing frequency these last few months. He was moving into my house, tonight. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was bringing her affair into our home, into the bed down the hall from our own, and expecting me to just... what? Accept it? Be the gracious, understanding husband while she explored her options under my own roof? A cold fire began to burn in my gut, cauterizing the wound she'd just inflicted and hardening it into resolve. I glanced at my watch, the hands ticking past 9 o'clock. A different clock was ticking louder in my head, a digital countdown. In less than 24 hours, at precisely 9 a.m. tomorrow, the $6,000 mortgage payment would automatically draft from our joint checking account, an account I had poured my inheritance into, an account she had treated like a personal slush fund for her boutique shopping and spa days. The timing was no coincidence. She and her lover were moving in, and I was expected to finance their little domestic experiment. A wave of clarity washed over me, so sharp and severe it almost made me dizzy. She was about to get the shock of her life. I was about to make sure she never saw another dime of our money, my money, ever again. A slow smile spread across my face, a chilling, hollow thing that didn't come anywhere near my eyes. I picked up my fork, speared the fallen piece of salmon, and took a deliberate bite. "Of course, honey," I said, my voice smooth as glass, betraying none of the chaos churning within me. "Anything for a friend in need. We have plenty of room." She finally looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by a wave of visible relief. She thought she'd won. She thought I was that weak. She had no idea that I wasn't just agreeing to her terms, I was starting the war. And my first move was already planned. The ride home was a study in silence. Sarah attempted to fill the void with mindless chatter about the traffic and the ridiculously overpriced valet, but I offered only monosyllabic responses. My mind was a whirlwind of logistics and cold, hard numbers. Each red light felt like an eternity, a taunt from the universe. By the time we pulled into our driveway, another car was already parked at the curb. A beat-up Honda Civic that screamed struggling musician, or, in this case, unemployed freeloader. Jake was already here, He hadn't even waited for us. He was standing on our porch, duffel bag at his feet, bathed in the welcoming glow of the light I'd paid to have installed last spring. As Sarah bustled out of the car, all smiles and apologies for the wait, I closed myself in my home office. The door clicked shut, a sound of finality. While she was playing the perfect hostess, showing her lover to the room where my own mother used to stay, I was dismantling our life together. I pulled up the banking app on my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. 6 months ago, a gnawing suspicion had led me to open a new, separate savings account with an online bank she'd never heard of. I'd named it Exodus. With 3 clicks and a security confirmation sent to my phone, I transferred half of our joint savings, a substantial 6-figure sum, into it. The transaction was instant and irreversible. The balance in our shared account dropped precipitously. Let the mortgage payment come tomorrow. It would be paid from what was left, but the war chest for my future was now secure, under my sole control. A weight I didn't even realize I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. The first decisive action was complete. I was staring at the confirmation email when the office door opened. It was Sarah, her face flushed with false bonhomie. "There you are. I was just getting Jake settled in. He says thank you again, by the way. It's really so sweet of you, Marcus." The condescension in her voice was a lit match on dry tinder. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You can't just move your boy toy in here, Sarah." Her smile faltered, the mask cracking. "He's not my—" she started, her voice defensive, a little too high-pitched. I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it. We both know what this is." We stared at each other across the room, the 10 feet of space between us a chasm filled with a decade of unspoken truths and fresh lies. Her eyes darted away, unable to hold my steady, accusing gaze. She knew that I knew. The game was over before it had even begun, and the look on her face, a mix of shock and dawning fear, was more satisfying than any anniversary dinner. She closed the door without another word. An hour later, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah had retreated to our bedroom, and I could only assume Jake was comfortably ensconced in his new temporary home. His gym bag, however, was still sitting by the front door where he'd left it. It was a cheap nylon thing, overflowing and partially unzipped. I told myself I was just moving it out of the entryway. I told myself it was for the sake of tidiness. But as my fingers closed around the strap, I knew I was going to look. Inside the guest room, I dropped the bag onto the floor. A few t-shirts and a pair of worn-out running shoes spilled out. But tucked into a side pocket, I saw a folded sheaf of papers. It wasn't an eviction notice or a letter from a landlord. It was a formal lease agreement, signed and dated. My blood ran cold as I read the tenant's name: Jake Miller and Jessica Albright. The address wasn't for a new apartment he'd lost, but for a place he was already living in. According to the document, his lease there wasn't up for another 4 months. And the final damning detail, the move-out date scrawled in the margins in what looked like a woman's handwriting, was yesterday's date. He hadn't been between apartments. He'd been kicked out by his ex-girlfriend. I stood there in the silent guest room, the crisp papers trembling in my hand. The lie was so blatant, so insulting in its simplicity. They hadn't even bothered to craft a believable story. The mortgage payment deadline loomed in my mind, no longer just a financial pressure point, but a strategic one. This was planned. It was all a calculated performance, timed perfectly to coincide with our largest monthly expense. They wanted to establish him in my house, create a new status quo, and do it at a moment of maximum financial leverage, assuming I'd be too distracted or too weak to fight back. They thought I would just roll over and fund their sordid little arrangement. I folded the lease agreement carefully and slipped it into my pocket. It was evidence, hard proof, The second I touched those papers, the fight became real. They had made a critical miscalculation. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The morning after was surreal. The mortgage payment had drafted at 9 a.m. sharp. A silent digital amputation from an account now critically wounded. I watched the confirmation pop up on my screen. A grim notification that for one more month I was paying for the roof that sheltered my wife and her lover. From my office window, I had a perfect, panoramic view of the back patio, the one I'd spent an entire summer building, laying each stone paver with my own hands. And there they were. Sarah and Jake, lounging in the wicker chairs I'd bought for our 5th anniversary, sipping coffee from our matching his and hers mugs. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Her laughter, a sound that I once cherished, now drifted up to my window like a poisoned dart. I watched as she leaned in, her expression animated, and placed a hand casually on his thigh. It wasn't a fleeting, friendly touch. It rested there, proprietary and familiar. He covered her hand with his own. My knuckles went white around the mouse. This wasn't just an affair. This was a hostile takeover. They were colonizing my life. One coffee cup, one shared laugh, one intimate touch at a time. That was when I picked up my phone, slid open the camera app, and zoomed in. Click. The first piece of new evidence. Her hand on his leg. Click. His hand covering hers. I would document everything. Every smile, every lingering glance. I was no longer a husband. I was a private investigator in my own home. The pettiness of her next move came to light around noon. I decided to order a few books online, guides to navigating high-conflict divorce. It seemed fitting. I proceeded to checkout, entered the details of our primary joint credit card, and hit place order. A red banner appeared. Transaction declined. I tried again, thinking I'd made a typo. Declined. I pulled out the secondary card, the one we used for travel rewards. Declined. A cold dread, different from the hot anger of the morning, crept up my spine. I logged into the credit card portal. My name was still on the account, but my card status was listed in bold red letters, deactivated. She must have done it this morning, or perhaps days ago. She had called the company, used her authority as the primary account holder, and financially neutered me. Or so she thought. It was a move designed to panic and control, to make me dependent on her goodwill. The reveal was staggering, not for its financial impact, I had my own accounts, but for the premeditation it exposed. This wasn't a recent dalliance. This was a long con. This was war, and she had been preparing her supply lines for months. As a final, bitter test, I clicked over to the Netflix tab that was still open on my browser. I hit refresh. The screen prompted me to log in. I typed in our familiar password, Marcus and Sarah forever. Incorrect password. She'd changed that too. A petty, juvenile act that somehow felt more intimate and insulting than the credit cards. She was locking me out of our shared digital life, erasing me one password at a time. Later that afternoon, I found her in the kitchen, humming as she unloaded the dishwasher. She turned, a bright, false smile plastered on her face. "Hi, Jake and I were just thinking about ordering pizza tonight. Any preference?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. My calm was unnerving her. I could see it in the way she refused to stand still. "Marcus, we need to talk like adults here," she said, her tone shifting to one of serious concern, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "I agree," I replied, my voice level. "Adults don't move their affairs into the family home." She flinched. "I told you he's not my affair. Jake is just a friend who was in a tough spot." Her denial was practiced, smooth, but the words were hollow. She was lying to my face, standing in the kitchen I paid for. "Really? A friend?" I pushed off the doorframe, taking a step closer. Friends don't pack 3 weeks of clothes for a few days, Sarah. I saw the flash of panic in her eyes. She didn't know I'd seen the overflowing duffel bag. It was a small detail, but it was a crack in her story, and we both knew it. It's a big bag. It looks like more than it is, she stammered, turning back to the dishwasher, her hands clattering against the plates. The conversation was over. I had landed my blow. I had let her know I was paying attention. As the blistering afternoon heat finally began to give way to the evening chill, I remained at my post by the office window. They had migrated from the chairs to the outdoor sofa, sitting closer now. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, painting them in hues of orange and red. The temperature drop outside matched the growing clarity inside me. The hot, chaotic rage was cooling, solidifying into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Purpose. I switched my phone's camera from photo to video, resting it on the windowsill for stability. I recorded them for 5 straight minutes, a silent film of their casual intimacy, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm draped around her back. It was irrefutable. As darkness fell completely, I sat at my desk, the only light coming from my monitor as I uploaded the day's photos and videos to a secure cloud folder, the same one where I'd saved a PDF of Jake's fraudulent lease. Each file was a bullet. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of her lies. She thought she was being clever with her credit card tricks and password changes, but those were the moves of an amateur. I was building a professional case, brick by damning brick. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. Long after Sarah's breathing had evened out into a steady, peaceful rhythm beside me, a sound that was now deeply unsettling, I found myself roaming the silent, darkened house. I moved like a ghost through rooms that suddenly felt alien, my feet padding softly on the cool hardwood floors. In the living room, a faint glow emanated from the coffee table. It was the shared iPad, the one we used for recipes and streaming movies on the couch. Sarah must have left it there after I'd locked her out of Netflix on the main TV. I picked it up, intending to plug it in, but the screen lit up with a notification banner at the top. A text message. Not for me, but for her. From Jake. The preview was short, just 6 words. "You were amazing today." He suspects nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. With a trembling finger, I swiped to open it. She hadn't logged out. Her entire iMessage history was synced, a digital chronicle of her betrayal laid bare under my fingertips. I sank onto the sofa, the leather groaning under my weight, and I began to read. It was all there, months of it. I scrolled backward, watching their affair blossom from flirty post-workout texts to explicit plans for their future. My future. My house. My money. They had nicknames for me. The Warden, Mr. Bank Account, the Golden Goose. Each message was a fresh stab of betrayal. I saw the planning for his arrival, the discussion about the timing, the way she'd reassured him I was too predictable, too passive to put up a fight. And then I found it. The conversation that changed everything. It was a thread from 2 weeks ago, a discussion about legal strategy. My lawyer was very clear, Sarah had written. You need to be living here to establish residency. Once you're officially a tenant, it strengthens my claim to the house when I file. Jake had replied, so I just have to stick it out for a month or so, even with him there. Sarah's response made my blood run cold. Especially with him there. It shows we tried to make it work. William says it looks better to the judge. Just play nice, be the helpful friend. And let me handle Marcus. He'll fund our transition without even knowing it. Williams. She had a lawyer. Not just a friend, not just a fling, but a lawyer. This was a premeditated legal and financial assault, and Jake's moving in was the opening salvo, a tactical maneuver advised by her attorney. I felt the floor drop out from under me, but instead of panic, a strange, terrifying calm settled in its place. They had given me their entire playbook. In that moment, sitting in the dark with the damning blue and gray bubbles of their conspiracy glowing on the screen, a vision of the future bloomed in my mind, vivid and startlingly clear. It wasn't a dream of revenge, not exactly. It was a premonition of victory. In 6 months, I'll be standing on the deck of a different house, a place that is entirely my own, with the crisp, clean scent of pine in the air. The city, this life, this woman, will be a distant memory, a chapter I've finished reading. I'll be with a different woman, someone whose laughter doesn't sound like a betrayal, someone whose touch is genuine. We'll be drinking coffee, and she'll ask me what I'm smiling about, and I'll just shake my head, a private joke playing out in my mind. And I will be laughing. Not a bitter laugh, but a deep, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom, thinking about how perfectly this all worked out for me, how their perfect setup was the catalyst that blasted me out of a mediocre life I had mistaken for a happy one. This vision wasn't a fantasy. It was a promise I was making to myself. It was the destination, and the path to get there had just become crystal clear. The next morning, I was a new man, playing a new role. I came downstairs whistling, a sound Sarah hadn't heard in years. She and Jake were already at the kitchen island, looking tense, likely wondering what my next move would be after our confrontation yesterday. I smiled brightly, opening the refrigerator. "Morning, you two. I was just about to make a pot of coffee. Want some?" Sarah stared at me, dumbfounded. Jake just blinked, looking wary. "And hey," I continued, pulling out the bacon, "I'm making a big breakfast. Jake, you've got to be tired of takeout. You're our guest, after all. Let me cook for you." I was the perfect accommodating husband, the cheerful, oblivious cuckold. Their confusion was palpable and delicious. I spent the day being relentlessly helpful. I offered Jake advice on the best local running trails. I asked Sarah if she needed me to pick up anything from the store. I was playing my part so well they started to relax, exchanging small, triumphant smiles when they thought I wasn't looking. They believed their plan was working. They believed I had accepted my fate. While they were basking in their perceived victory, I was in a sterile downtown high-rise, sitting across a large mahogany desk from a man named Attorney David Williams, my attorney. He was sharp, focused, and exuded a reassuring, no-nonsense competence. I had found him through a friend, and his reputation preceded him. "She retained a lawyer named Williams?" he asked, a thin smile playing on his lips. "I know him. Aggressive but sloppy. He relies on his clients being smarter than their spouses. It's a bad bet in this case." I had laid it all out for him. The timeline, the sudden arrival of Jake, the blocked credit cards, the lease I'd found, and the pièce de résistance, the screenshots of the text messages from the iPad. I had spent 2 hours before dawn meticulously photographing every single incriminating conversation. "This is extraordinary, Marcus," Williams said, leaning back in his chair. "Most of my job is digging for this kind of proof. You've served it to me on a silver platter." "So, what's our move?" I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. "Our move is to let them get comfortable," he said, steepling his fingers. "Her lawyer is advising her to establish Jake's residency. Fine. We'll let him establish it. We want him so entangled in this that he can't get out. Right now, your wife thinks she's in control. She thinks she's cut you off financially and is slowly taking over the house. We let her keep thinking that." "But the money, the house." "The money you moved is safe. We'll file an injunction to freeze the remaining joint assets at the right moment. As for the house, you've been paying the mortgage. You have the records. Her little ploy with the credit cards is a gift. It shows malicious financial intent. But the texts are the kill shot. A lawyer advising a client to commit what amounts to residency fraud to gain leverage in a divorce? Another attorney would have a field day with that. But we can do better. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. We need to know more about Jake, the ex-girlfriend Jessica Albright, on that lease. She's our next stop, but you can't be the one to do it. You're playing the part of the happy husband, remember? So, what do you suggest? I suggest you hire a private investigator I work with. He's discreet, he's brilliant, and he will find out everything there is to know about Mr. Jake Miller and his living arrangements. Let's see how this perfect setup looks when we shine a very bright, very unflattering light on it. I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. The fog of humiliation had lifted, replaced by the cold, clear air of strategy. I had a plan. I had a team. That afternoon, while Sarah and Jake were laughing on the back patio, I made a call from my car parked a block away. The man on the other end had a quiet, gravelly voice. I gave him the details. Jake Miller, Jessica Albright, their last known address. I'm on it, he said, and the line went dead. The game had changed. They thought they were playing checkers. I was about to start playing chess. For 2 weeks, I was the model husband, a paragon of patience and denial. I made them breakfast, asked about their days, and feigned ignorance with an Oscar-worthy performance. All the while, the private investigator was my shadow army, my eyes and ears in the world they thought I couldn't see. The report landed in my secure email inbox on a Tuesday morning. It was concise, professional, and more damning than I could have possibly imagined. The file contained a series of high-resolution photographs, time-stamped and geotagged. There was Jake, not at a coffee shop looking for jobs, but letting himself into his ex-girlfriend's apartment building with his own key fob. There he was, carrying in her groceries, his arms slung casually around her waist. The final photo, taken just this morning, showed them sharing a kiss on her balcony, a tender, domestic moment. He had never left her. He wasn't crashing on my couch because he was homeless. He was crashing there on his nights off from his real life. He wasn't just playing me. He was playing Sarah, too. The realization hit me not with anger, but with a profound, icy clarity. She had brought a viper into our home, thinking he was her ally, but he was loyal only to himself. This wasn't a love triangle, it was a chain of deception, and I was about to break every single link. I forwarded the file to Attorney Williams with a simple message: execute. The plan moved with military precision. At 1:55 p.m., I received a text from the process server. Package will be delivered in 5 minutes. I knew from Sarah's shared work calendar, another digital thread she had forgotten to sever, that her entire marketing department was gathering for their quarterly review at 2 p.m. I pictured the scene. The polite, professionally dressed server walking through the glass doors of her sleek downtown office, asking for Sarah Collins. I imagined the eyes of her colleagues turning, the curious whispers. I saw him hand her the thick manila envelope, her name, and the words petition for dissolution of marriage typed neatly on the front. I envisioned the blood draining from her face, her composure shattering in front of the very people she worked so hard to impress. While her world was imploding in a public forum, my world was being rebuilt. At that exact moment, a locksmith was at my front door, the whir of his drill methodically erasing her access to the house. New tumblers, new deadbolts, new keys that belonged only to me. Jake's duffel bags, which I had packed myself that morning, sat neatly by the curb like a sad, abandoned memorial to their failed coup. She must have broken every speed limit getting home. I heard the squeal of her tires as she pulled into the driveway, the car door slamming with enough force to rattle the windows. I watched from the living room as she stomped up the walkway, her face a thunderous mask of fury. She jammed her key into the new lock. It didn't fit. She tried again, rattling it with frantic, impotent rage. Then came the banging, a series of loud, hollow thuds against the solid oak door. I let her go on for a full minute before calmly walking over and opening it, leaving the security chain in place. She stood on the porch, breathless and wild-eyed. "You can't lock me out of my own house," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's interesting you should say that," I replied, my tone deliberately calm and quiet, forcing her to lower her own. "I'd invite you to check the deed, Sarah. Then check the bank statements. Check who's been paying the mortgage solo for the past 8 months while your contribution went to, well, other things." I had the paperwork from Williams, showing every transfer I'd made to cover her share long before this fiasco began. "This is insane, Marcus," she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You've gone insane." "No, what's insane is thinking I'd continue to subsidize your love nest under my own roof," I said, my voice hardening. "What's insane is believing your little plan was ever going to work." "Jake is my guest. He has rights." "Jake has a girlfriend named Jessica, Sarah," I said, letting the name hang in the air between us. "He's been with her every single day. The PI has some lovely photos if you'd like to see them. Or you could just ask him." "Oh, wait," I said, feigning recollection. "You probably can't. He seems to have cleared out." I gestured to the bags on the curb. Her eyes followed my gesture, and the last bit of fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. She wasn't just losing me. She was realizing her co-conspirator had abandoned her. By sunset, the war was over, and she just didn't know all the terms of her surrender yet. I watched through the window as she finally gave up. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and got back in her car. She sat there for a long time, probably trying to call Jake, a man who had likely already changed his number. The PI's final act had been a quiet conversation with Jake himself. A simple presentation of the facts that made it clear his multi-woman grift was over. A few $100s had probably been enough to ensure his swift and permanent disappearance. As her car finally pulled away, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Attorney Williams. "Injunction served. All joint accounts are frozen pending judicial review." She would discover that soon enough, when she tried to use her debit card to buy a bottle of wine or check into a hotel. She was locked out of her home. Her lover had vanished, and her access to our shared wealth was gone. I stood in the center of my silent, reclaimed house. It was finally, truly, just mine. The setting sun streamed through the windows, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of peace. The email from Sarah's new, very expensive lawyer had been predictable, full of blustering threats and false accusations of abandonment and cruelty. But her voicemails told a different story, a frantic medley of rage, tears, and eventually pleading. Her final gambit was a desperate appeal to our history, a request for one last session with Dr. Peterson, the couple's therapist we hadn't seen in years. "Just to talk, Marcus," she'd sobbed into the phone, "so we can understand what happened. For closure." I knew it wasn't about closure. It was about control. It was one last attempt to manipulate me, to play the victim in a controlled environment with a sympathetic audience. I agreed immediately. It was the perfect stage for the final act. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a calm, gray suit that felt like armor. Sarah was already there, sitting on the familiar beige sofa, looking pale and artfully distraught. She had positioned herself as the wronged wife, waiting for her unstable husband to be brought to heel. Dr. Peterson, a kind woman with gentle eyes, offered me a soft smile. "Marcus, thank you for coming. Sarah has expressed that she's feeling very overwhelmed by the recent escalation of events. She's hoping you can both talk through it." I nodded. taking the armchair opposite them. "I'm happy to talk," I said, my voice even. "In fact, I've prepared for it." I reached into my briefcase and retrieved a thick, black 3-ring binder, placing it on the low glass table between us with a heavy, definitive thud. The word evidence was printed on a label affixed to the spine. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Dr. Peterson looked from the folder to me, her professional calm faltering. Sarah stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "What is this, Marcus? Some kind of joke?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't answer her. I opened the binder to the first page, a clear plastic sleeve containing a glossy 80x10 photo. It was the picture I'd taken from my office window of her hand resting on Jake's thigh on the patio. I turned the binder around for them both to see. Dr. Peterson's eyes widened. "Sarah," I began, my voice devoid of emotion, "perhaps you can explain this." Sarah scoffed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "These photos are fake. You probably photoshopped them to make me look bad. This is pathetic." I calmly flipped the page to a printout of the photo's metadata, showing the date, time, and the iPhone model it was taken with. "Are the timestamps fake too, Sarah?" I flipped again, revealing the photos of them on the outdoor sofa, her head on his shoulder. Page after page, a silent slideshow of her lies. "And these? And these?" Her bravado began to crumble, replaced by a rising panic. "You hired someone to stalk me," she accused, her voice climbing. She looked at Dr. Peterson, seeking an ally. "He had me followed, Doctor. This is harassment." "I didn't hire someone to stalk you, Sarah," I corrected her calmly, my gaze unwavering. "I hired someone to document your fraud." I flipped to the next section, a copy of Jake's lease with Jessica Albright. "Like this lease, proving your homeless friend had a home he was sharing with his live-in girlfriend. Or this," I continued, turning the page to the screenshots of her text messages. "This is my personal favorite. Your text to Jake about how your lawyer, Mr. Williams, advised you to have Jake establish residency in my house to strengthen your claim to it in the divorce." Dr. Peterson let out an audible gasp. She looked at Sarah, whose face had gone ashen. The therapeutic environment had vanished, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a deposition. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of pure fury. "You don't understand anything. Jake loves me. He was leaving her for me. This was real." That was my cue. I reached back into my briefcase. "That's the thing about love, Sarah. It's a tricky word." I pulled out a second item and placed it on the table next to the binder. It was Jake's phone. "He must have left it behind when he disappeared so quickly. It was in the guest room. Lucky I found it." Her eyes fixated on the phone, a small black rectangle that held the entire truth. The PI had done excellent work, not only convincing Jake to vanish, but also to part with his phone for a reasonable cash settlement. A small price to pay for the ultimate checkmate. I unlocked it. The passcode had been part of the settlement, and opened his messages, turning the screen so she could see. The top conversation wasn't with her, it was with Jess. 3. "He claims to love you," I said, my voice low and steady. "But Jake's been texting his ex about moving back in with her permanently." I scrolled through the messages, her desperate, unanswered texts to him interspersed with his loving, apologetic ones to the other woman. I didn't have to read them aloud. She could see the previews, see the heart emojis, see the plans they were making for a future that never included her. "I'm so sorry, babe. I got in over my head. It was always you." I read one of his outgoing messages aloud. "Just a few more days and I'll have enough cash to get us that new couch we wanted. Almost done with this crazy bitch." Sarah made a choking sound, a wounded animal cry. She lunged for the phone, but I was faster, pulling it back. It's all here, Sarah. Every lie he told you, every lie he told her. It seems the only person he was ever honest with was himself. The session ended right there. The carefully constructed facade of her victimhood shattered into a million pieces, and all that was left was the ugly, raw truth. She finally broke, dissolving into racking sobs, her face buried in her hands. Dr. Peterson sat in stunned silence, a referee at a match that had turned into a slaughter. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, and then back at her weeping client. There was nothing more to say. The truth was on the table, undeniable and absolute. I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. I took a business card from my wallet and slid it across the glass table until it stopped right beside Jake's phone. It was for Attorney Williams, my attorney. From here on out, all communication can go through him, I said softly. It was a final act of severance, the last tie between our personal lives being cut. She didn't look up. As I reached the door, I paused, turning back for one final statement. You know, it's funny how things work out, I said, my tone almost conversational. Dr. Peterson and Sarah both looked up at me, confused. I just got a preliminary job offer yesterday, a really great opportunity. It's in Denver. I let that hang in the air for a moment, planting the seed of my next chapter not just for them, but for myself. My future was already beginning, 1,000 miles away from this room, from this life. I didn't wait for a response. I just turned, walked out the door, and didn't look back. The air was different here, thinner, cleaner, and filled with the faint scent of pine from the foothills that rose like giants in the distance. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had walked out of Dr. Peterson's office, the weight of my old life sloughing off my shoulders with every step. Now, the evening sun cast a warm, golden glow across the new wooden deck I'd just finished staining last weekend. David, my oldest and best friend, had flown in to see the new place, and he raised his beer bottle in a toast, the glass clinking against mine. Congratulations on your freedom and your new house, he said, a wide, genuine grin spreading across his face. Seriously, Marcus, I haven't seen you look this relaxed in 10 years. You look lighter. I took a long sip of the cold beer and leaned back in my chair, soaking in the peace. Lighter is a good word for it, I admitted. I didn't realize how heavy everything was until it was gone. The house, the marriage, the expectations. It was all just weight. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sky melt from blue to fiery orange over the mountains. You ever hear from her? David finally asked, his voice gentle. I shook my head. Not directly. The lawyers handled everything after that day. It was a clean break, as clean as it could be anyway. I spend my weekends now about an hour west of here, up in the mountains. I bought a small, neglected A-frame cabin, the kind of place I'd always dreamed of having but never thought was practical. It's a project. I'm renovating it with my contractor-turned-girlfriend, Emma. I met her when she was bidding on the remodel for my new office space downtown. She's brilliant and funny, with sawdust in her hair and paint on her jeans. Her hands aren't soft and manicured. They're strong and capable, skilled at creating and building things, not tearing them down. Together, we're ripping out old carpets, sanding down wooden beams that have been hidden for decades, and drawing up plans for a future we're building with our own hands. Last week, out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't quite suppress, I looked up Sarah's Instagram. Her profile was public. The glossy photos of her at galas and five-star restaurants were gone. They'd been replaced by selfies taken in a room with familiar floral wallpaper and a white canopy bed. Her childhood bedroom. She was back at her parents' house, pushing 40 and living down the hall from her mom and dad. Her posts were full of a forced, brittle brightness. captions about new beginnings and finding myself that rang hollow. Jake was nowhere to be seen, a ghost who had vanished completely from her narrative. In the end, her grand, fraudulent plan for my house and my money had left her with nothing but a return ticket to her past. There was a time when seeing that would have filled me with a sense of vindictive triumph, a bitter "I told you so." But sitting there, scrolling through the sad chronicle of her diminished life, I felt nothing but a profound sense of detachment. Her choices were her own, and her fate was a direct result of them. My revenge wasn't in her failure, it was in my own success. It was in the scent of fresh-cut lumber at the cabin, in the easy laughter I shared with Emma, in the quiet satisfaction of paying a mortgage that was solely mine, in the spectacular, indifferent beauty of a Rocky Mountain sunset. The fire of my anger had burned itself out, leaving behind not scorched earth, but fertile ground. Sometimes the best revenge is simply moving forward. It's building a life so full and good that you don't have time to look back at the rubble.